Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here to review Memento. I know that this movie is to go on and deal with short term memory loss, and I know that that is a very sensitive subject to make jokes about anywhere. In all honesty, like, I myself, in my own personal life, am going to be dealing with a relative that is to have dementia who is to be my own father. So when I watch movies like this, I watch them honestly to kind of get ideas, to maybe be a step ahead of things. Um, Even though it's not the same exact thing, still, um, I go on and I kind of watch these movies like, oh, well, I could probably go on and I could take what he's doing and I can insert that into what's going on in my real life, to just be like, oh yeah, maybe he should use this as a way to help and this and that. So I myself am to try to be aware that some of my jokes may go on and may be insensitive, but like honestly, that's not the direction of which that any of this is really meant to be at any point. But anyways, so Memento to me goes on and is to be very similar to like the Drew Barrymore movie 51st Dates. There is to be a Joseph Gordon-Levitt's movie called The Lookout, which I had gone on to see, where a character has a brain injury that eventually deals in like a bank robbery. There is to also be a show where we had the actress who was in Thor, who is Lady Sif. She is to be uncovered and have all these tattoos all over her body, and they have to figure out what all the tattoos mean. And that is to be a show called Blind Spot, and that also is to kind of feel very much like this, and probably going to be something that I'm going to tag this to, because of course I am. So let me know also in the comments below any kind of other memory loss film, because maybe at some point I will probably check them out at some point in this film or at some point in this channel, because it'll actually be a thing that will go on and help me out, but also will be a thing that'll be really interesting to just kind of put within the channel. So Memento has a character, Leonard, which I will call Lenny because he hates it, and I think it's funny, that has short term memory loss and is to be around people that I feel honestly take full advantage of it. And that's kind of sad. But Lenny is to have this investigation, trying to figure out who is to have been the one to have killed his wife. And it seems that at some point we come to find that Lenny is to have something about him that needs to be uncovered by the end of the film. That he is to have a basement. He is to have something that needs to be addressed, that is to have something to be wrong with him. And clearly by the end of the film, I was thinking that this was to almost be built up as like Jim Carrey's The Number 23, where by the end of that film, after you get through all the oh yeah, 2-3, 23, like by the end of the film, we'd come to find out that Jim Carrey would be going on to have killed and what have you by the end of that film, and would have been the person that was to have been his own story that he's reading within that film. So within this movie, I am to go on and find out that also that this movie was be directed by Christopher Nolan And right out of the gate, when you start this film, you can immediately look at it and be like, yep, Tenet, right then and there. Like the whole beginning of the movie like reverses, and you're like, all right, that is to tell me one that this movie is going to be done completely in reverse because that's what it does. And also, we can really very much see Tenet be put throughout this entire film because what it all it accomplishes. So for Memento, Lenny goes on and meets up with characters of Bert, Natalie, and Teddy. Across Lenny's chest says the words, John B. is to have killed your wife. There are some extra words there, but I'm not saying them. I don't like the R word, and I try to avoid it at all cost. So Leonard is to try to figure out who this John G character is, and so he goes to these areas to then hope that this will lead him further into going on and unraveling this investigation. Lenny is to seemingly be a insurance investigator, but somehow he is to inevitably go on and investigate this case because he is to be partnered up with a cop anyways, called Teddy. So Lenny is to go on to make his way to this discount inn where he meets up with Bert, who takes advantage of him because he double books him into two different rooms because the guy won't really remember anyways, as well as also Bert goes on and tells him, yeah, how about every time in the future, get a receipt. Lenny goes on to find Natalie to try to get information from her about license plates and so on and so forth, and it seems that also Natalie is to have a husband who is a prior drug dealer, so Lenny can go on to Natalie to find out a bit of information that leads her to characters like Dodd. So, but then also, Natalie goes on and uses Lenny because she knows that he won't remember, or she knows that he won't remember things. So at some point she goes on and kind of says whatever she wants to him, goes on, sleeps with him, and is to further do horrible things like spit into his drink because he won't remember it. So then we have Teddy. Teddy, we come to find, so much so, is trying to figure out ways to hide things from Lenny, even his own name. Teddy, we come to find, is to be so quickly in the very beginning of this film to be a guy that we know is to be bad, but then throughout this film, we have to go on and figure out why he is to be bad. And by the end of the film, they go on to, of course, explain that. So, for Teddy, we find out that Teddy has been using Lenny in finding Lenny's wife's killer, is to really be much more of a endless endeavor, because the way of which that Teddy is going to work Lenny within this film. And in the very beginning of this piece, we have Teddy that tells Lenny that he doesn't know who he is. If anything, there are to go on and be notes in which that are to be all over his body. He goes on and he himself is to have these things that are to go on and assist his own self. But from the time that his wife had died to whatever modern day is, there is just a lot of things that Leonard can't exactly be sure of what he has gone on to do, because he is to have been a one person who, of course, the slate wipes clean, and if anything, when he is to not have that memory, he can't be held accountable for anything. Or he himself would not know he is to go on and be held accountable because he doesn't have the memory of it. So, with that said, this movie was also feel like the film Bloodshot that had Vin Diesel in it. Eventually, by the later half of the film, you find out that there is a pattern that's going on with Vin Diesel's character in Bloodshot, and that can also be very much similar to Memento, in a way. So, with that said, Memento, I would go on to say, is so interesting because of its reverse order. And regardless of how simple this movie all is, and how a headache it could also become watching it, because you have the two different things going on. You have the reverse movie, but then also you have the black and white flashback thing that has a flow of momentum in between the scenes where it's reversing every bit of what's going on in the film. So we have two different stories going on at the same time, and it's to be one in the flashback, the black and white, a fluid story that talks about this guy named Sam who has this short-term memory loss, that Lenny had been a person assessing whether Sam was faking his short-term memory loss or not. And we have Leonard that is to kind of assume that maybe Sam is faking it, but then when we get further into this film, there's no way to be sure about it. As well as also, we will always go on and like be racking our minds to just be like, man, was he faking it? Was he not faking it? We'll never know. Like, it's the Schrodinger's cat of like, man, I would like to go on and I would like to ask the cast, or I'd like to ask Christopher Nolan, like, the questions of this movie, to be like, okay, like, in this movie, give me the answers of this film. Like, was he faking it or was he not faking it? Like how long between the wife being dead and modern day had it passed? Like, how many people did probably Leonard be involved in, let's just say, within this piece? And just thinking about all of this after the fact, like, that's what just makes this movie really entertaining, because it's not just about the movie, it's processing it. And so I had a lot of fun processing and watching this film and really finding it very challenging watching a movie that is not done in a normal flow of things, because I like a normal flow of film, and I'm like, this is gonna be the opposite of what I like. So it's like really riding against, specifically for me, like, I of me liking a good flow of movie. Um, so yeah, like that for me was just like, oh, it was like tearing off my arm, in a very vicious way of just like like you're really going on up my flow. But anyways, so yeah, this movie was fun. I liked it. I'll go on and I'll give it a uh I'll say the Memento is a solid okay. So I'll thumb it up. Um I'll say that it's a okay, solid okay, because really for this movie, the whole taking advantage of the memory loss thing, that really sucks. There is also just some really interesting things going on in this film, and the whole reveal by the end, like it felt like a good investment of which that I've made to figure out what this movie's all about, and figure out how eventually they play everything out is really interesting. And to try to rationalize and make sense of it all, yeah, it was a lot of fun to me. I enjoyed it. I watched it, and then I'm to have to go on now and break this all down into scene for scene, blow for blow, and that's going to be probably really challenging to figure out what all was to be reverse happening within this piece. But if anything, it could be the thing that is to kind of be enjoyable about this, to get this challenge and kind of cover it. So, with that said, let me know in the comments below your thoughts on Memento. Some people will probably absolutely hate this film, and some people thought, or may have thought, that it epic, great, whatever. At the end of the day, also, I'll just say that I could just go out of my way to watch this movie, have it be a thing of content to review, and then be done with it. So that's great. So, so either way, hopefully people will watch this review. I hope so. Anyways, so let me know in the comments below any memory loss film you are possibly go on and enjoy, because maybe at some point I will go on and check it out. Also, uh, there is also to me to enjoy like movies that are to be not approached in a normal way of manner, so that way I can go on and just find them a little more challenging to review. So hopefully there is more like these out here, that I will go on and find my way of enjoyment. Yeah, definitely the number 23 is to be one of those mind f movies that really I don't know if I'll go on and ever review that, but like I don't know, maybe I might be up for the challenge to just take that on. And I know that there's like two different endings of that film, hence why I'm kind of scarce about going on and actually watching it, because there's two different kind of endings. So like, or there's two different kind of approaches to the movie. So I'm just like, well, what cut am I gonna get, or what cut are other people going to watch? And so the ending that I get may not be the same as other people. So with that said, this movie is available on Tubi, I believe. If not, then if anything, there might be a bootleg option for you to go on and check this movie out. Uh, there is to be a app that I've been using recently called Clede Plus, KLEDE Plus. If anything, I go on and recommend that strongly, because all the other ones, like, it's always to be kind of unsure whether or not they're going to last or not. I would immediately go on and recommend something called Movie Box 3, but if anything, I don't know if that app really exists anymore, or if it works, so I've been recommending that, but it hasn't been really a thing that actually seems to be working, or I can find it anymore. There is a app called Allbox123 Movies that I had gone on to check out a film, and that app seems to be working. I've gone on to kind of look into things. It seems to be a thing that I can go on and use at some point on here, so I may recommend that. Uh, I'm sure there's a number of other kind of bootleg app things that I've gone on and said and mentioned, whatever, upon this reviews of past. But also, I'm sure there's a number of other things that I could probably go on and mention to you if that first one does not do. Uh, but if anyways, let's go on and let's break down this movie because I think it's about that time to get into spoil time. Spoil time is about that time and spoil this movie. Let me know in the comments below a favorite Guy Pierce. I don't know. I don't know. Go on and mention your favorite Christopher Nolan film and tell me why it isn't Interstellar, right? Or one of the Batman films, or or maybe you're like, no, I like Tenet. I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, I didn't like. I don't think I really absolutely hated that movie, but then again, you'd have to probably go into my review to probably feel how I felt about it, and probably feel that I don't care about the Tenet film, the Tenet film, and I don't feel like I'm ever gonna go out of my way to watch it again. Um, I actually did have to like rewatch bits and pieces of it just so we can get a different thumbnail because I changed the thumbnail in that piece. Uh, but um, but yeah, I never really rewatched the film because I'm like, why? But anyways, so with that said, I think it's about that time to just go into spoilers. Future reviews also. Yeah, like I've gone on to say this plethora of different times that I'm doing a lot of action things. I'm kind of itching to probably go on and maybe cover the Billy Zane movie, The Phantom, because for some effing reason I go into to Love That Danhausen's YouTube channel and I find all these random bits of videos where all the time he's talking about Billy Zane and The Phantom and whatever. Like even a Ghostbusters review, he's talking about Billy Zane and The Phantom. I'm like, man, like, is he just kind of keep re-bringing that up because it's funny, or is there just something to that whole Phantom movie um, that there's a reason for him going on and bringing that up so much? It's probably a joke, but whatever. I'm just like, why does he bring that up so often? So if anything, maybe there's just an effing reason why he's bringing it up so often. So maybe I should review it on the channel finally. Maybe when push comes to shove, it's a justification to check that thing out for frickin' once. Uh, I should honestly be going on and covering X-Men 97 as well as also Spider Noir, and I'm honestly just kind of tempted to just cover them simultaneously and doing one episode at a time, just so that way I can get them both covered very soon. That's my kind of goal, and I probably will do that fairly soon just to get those kind of covered. And at some point, season 2 of X-Men 97 is coming in July, hence why I'm just kind of pushing to actually get that done. I honestly don't think that anybody's going to really care about either one of those reviews after this point. But I don't care. I'm covering them anyways because feasibly I could just go on and say that there's stuff that I'm just going to push out anyways. Like, really, I'm going on and just kind of getting to a point where, like, I'm just going to really throw everything onto YouTube at this point because really I'm to go on and either feel that there's just some videos that are just doing well anyways, surprisingly, but also there's some stuff that I feel is to logically get to because I think it might actually do well on the channel. So hence my real pushing of wanting to do that. There was an anime called Gantz that seems to be on my radar as a first thing up of my analytics and whatever. So I will probably go on and be forced, or not really forced, like because I'd watched the whole second season. There's a review of that exists. It seems that that is actually doing decent numbers right now. I may be justified into going into covering the first season of that, which which will be fun. I just bit my own mouth, um, my own lip, whatever, what have you. So, with that said, there's a lot of that I've probably said in other reviews, and probably some of them may eventually get covered. There's a temptation to cover all the big action films that have kind of been newly released, and I'm probably going to wait forever to finally get them covered. And people would just be like, why do that? This is a waste of time. But also, I'd go on to review Scream 7, and for some reason, people actually went into that and they watched it and even liked it. I appreciate that shit. Like, I appreciate anybody going on into these reviews, viewing it. You don't have to like it. You don't even have to comment. Just view the shit out of it. Like, I'm hoping that some video is to just show me that it actually just is to go on and do well. You like it, and that's all that matters. Because at the end of the day, I'm just gonna have to keep continuing to do these just consistently, just non-stoppingly, just unless my freaking mind melts or I get a freaking injury that really is to go on and affect me getting around. Uh, which I'm sure will probably happen at some point for how. Let's not get into that, but whatever. So, it's bound to happen, I'm sure. Anyways, so let's get into spoilers, because you've already been hearing me gab for 27 minutes about a lick of nothing. I'm sure the whole teeing up of this entire movie is like, he said nothing there. Nothing helped me. Why would I go on and listen to this? Why? Which I would go on and say, because I desperately need you to. But also, I liked the movie. It was good. So, if that's not a glowing recommendation to run your way into this film and check it out, and then be very disappointed because I'm to have been a one to have guided you into this film that inevitably you probably hated, and you hate me because I talked about it, my apologies. But anyways, we're gonna talk about this film anyways. So, in the very beginning of this piece, we come to find there is a Polaroid picture taken. And it is to have been from a dead person who had had their head blown off. So, we come to find that this picture is consistently getting shook, and then in reverse, the Polaroid goes back into the camera, the bullet goes back into the gun, the glasses go back on to said Teddy, and we find out that this person is to actually be Teddy that that Lenny is to be killing here. So Lenny is to be talking about how he's to have gone to this hotel room, this room 302. But that'll get confused because eventually Bert will go on to have him go into two different rooms, and then eventually he will get confused of which one it is. So the next thing we cut to is Lenny at this hotel room, and he has no idea how long he's been here for. He could probably say that he's probably been there for a week, or he's probably been there for 3 months. If anything, on his leg, it says the word shave on it, and Lenny eventually goes on and spots that and then shaves his leg, because eventually he has to go on and put more tattoos on his body. So, Lenny goes on to find on this table money, and he finds this picture of Teddy who has his phone number. So Bert makes his way, or Bert, Lenny makes his way to the counter to talk to Bert at this motel, and as Lenny goes on to kind of talk to everybody, he always has to mention to them about his condition, whether or not he could probably tell that they have probably heard it at some point, or he's said about, because he's unsure. As well as also, there's some people that F with him anyways. Like, at some point, Lenny will go on and talk about his condition, and then Bert's like, oh yeah, you have told me about this before, but I was just like, I wasn't really thinking that you were being honest with me, but it looks like you are. So it's like, oh, okay, so Bert is like, okay, so you're telling me the truth that you do have this issue. I'm like, oh, okay. So so Bert goes on and is talking to Lenny here. So Lenny is to ask about this photo and ask Bert if he has seen this guy. And Bert tells Lenny it's like, oh yeah, he's right outside the door there. So the guy in the photo, of course, is obviously Teddy. And so the two of them start having this conversation, and Lenny goes on to say to him, it's like, well, yeah, I guess I probably told you about my condition. And Teddy's like, well, yeah, every time I see you, you have to bring it up. Also, uh, Teddy is to go on and mention about how many times that that Lenny is to bring up Sammy, the guy of which that was to have been um, the prior insurance client that he had. So now Lenny is to try to get into his car, and he doesn't even know what his car is. Like, he doesn't remember which car he's going to go on and get into. We come to find out within this film that the clothes that Lenny is wearing and the car that he gets into, none of it is even his. But eventually, that is to be a spoiler for a little bit of the later part of the film. So, yeah. So, Teddy has to go on and has to tell Lenny to get into his car, and so he does. And it ends up being a Jaguar. And at some point later on in the film, they have Teddy talk to Lenny about how he is to all of a sudden own a Jaguar, and it doesn't make sense. And Lenny is to say, it's like, well, like, I have this Jaguar car because of the insurance of which that was paid really well for my wife's death. And then he's like, but yeah, like, I can understand that, but really, to be able to afford a Jaguar? Like, how does that make any sense? Plus, also, Teddy then goes on to look at Lenny's clothes, like, well, yeah, like, your clothes don't make sense either. So, yeah, so as the two of them start talking in the very beginning of this piece, The first thing that Teddy notices as he forces Lenny to roll his window down is that the window is broken because the glass was shattered in it. Eventually, we'll come to find that Lenny will have dealt with a guy named Dodd, and Dodd will be the breaker of said window. So, so Teddy asks Lenny where exactly they're going, and Lenny mentions that they're going to some building, and Teddy's like, "Well, why would we want to go there?" And Lenny has no idea, but he had gotten this address, and he needs to seek it out. So the two of them make their way to this building, and yeah, they have no clue why they're there. Lenny goes on to find this truck, opens up the truck, find that there are bullets that are on the seat, has no idea why they're there. And so as he continues to start looking around, he all of a sudden sees, as he goes through his photos, Teddy's picture, and on the back of it, it says, "Don't believe his lies. He is the one. Kill him." And so we completely figure out so early in this film that Teddy is going to be the one that that Lenny is to kill, because his real name is John G. And that of course, the chest of Lenny says John G had killed your wife. So they look around and they have no idea what they're looking for. But Lenny grabs Teddy here, pulls him to the ground, takes a gun, pulls the trigger, and then blows his brains out. And so after that, we then cut to this black and white. So Lenny goes on to find on his hand a saying that says, "Remember Sammy Jenkins." And at some point, yeah, we'll have, of course, Lenny that tells Teddy about the whole Sammy thing. And here's what we have on his thigh where it says shave. And on the Polaroid of Teddy, it says, "He is the one, kill him," where he writes it out. So we come to find on this paper that that Lenny looks through. He finds this driver's license that has Teddy's face on it, and it has his address, it has his real name, and then so Lenny is to immediately assume, oh, he's been the guy that's been lying to me this whole time, and he is the killer, he is the one. And so we'll come to find out that Teddy going by the name Teddy is just a nickname, but also Teddy goes on to give Teddy or goes on to give Lenny his nickname because Teddy says, "Oh, I'm undercover." He lies to him just so that way he himself won't go on and be under suspicion by Lenny himself, but that'll backfire on him in the later part of the film. Anyways, so Lenny goes on to make his way back to Bert, and and it seems that in his conversation, Bert is to mention about how he has held Lenny's calls. Well, come to find out that Lenny, for a long time, was getting calls by this detective who is to actually be Teddy. And at some point, Lenny does look down at one of his tattoos and it says, "Don't answer the phone." So there's going to be an envelope coming to Lenny's door that says, "Answer the phone." But, anyways, so it'll very much confuse Lenny kind of going forward. So if anything here, Lenny talks to Bert about his condition and how it's not amnesia and how it's much more of a short-term memory loss. And so here is where Bert goes on and admits it's like, "Well, yeah, you've told me about this before." So Bert goes on and asks Lenny what is the last thing he remembers, and Lenny mentions that the last thing that he remembers is his wife, because the last thing he remembers is his wife being killed. So, I guess the one thing that could probably come out of this is that Lenny will go on and will technically always remember his wife because it's the last thing he remembers. But also, Lenny at some point in this movie is to also say how he will forever be in grief because he won't have that time to have mourned her loss because short-term memory loss kind of wipes that away. So, yeah, the pain will always be there, and that's what just kind of just is to be saddened about this whole situation. So also Lenny talks about how everything to him is so backwards, and he has no idea about what to do next. And so the next thing we go on and we see is that Lenny looks at the picture of Teddy, and then the whole thing starts all over again with Teddy meeting up with Lenny, and then we cut back to the black and white scene where Lenny is going on and shaving his leg, and we have him put on a tattoo, and all of a sudden the phone rings. Lenny goes on and answers it and says, "Who is this?" He continues to go on and at some point scratch a freshly done tattoo on his arm. And eventually, when he does go on and when he does open said tattoo, it says, "Don't answer the phone." But I guess in this case, Lenny goes on and mistakenly answers the phone and finds out that this is none other than Teddy here. So Lenny goes on to have made his way into this restaurant. So we cut to this. Lenny starts to look down and is to notice the tattoo of Remember Sammy Jenkins on his arm. It says the facts. And so Lenny goes on to have these items with him. And so this waiter goes on and tells Lenny the directions for this discount inn, this hotel. And Lenny is going to go on and next make his way there. Like it's his first time, because technically, to him, it is his first time because memory loss, but also, Lenny within this diner is to get this key of which that he had lost from Natalie. And we'll go back in reverse and we'll get to that point. So as Lenny gets in this hotel room, he goes on and he has this map and he starts to put all these pictures on it, which doesn't quite make sense because he'll be holding on to all the pictures later on. But so, one of the pictures is to be of Natalie, and other things are to be of like the discount inn, and all these things like Teddy will all be on here. Here's where we have the ID of John G of Teddy here, and here's where Lenny goes on and is to look at the back of the picture that says "Don't believe his lies." So now we cut to having Lenny start to look at all of his tattoos all over his body, just to see if there's something there that he can use. He goes on and sees on his chest the big "John G is the one that killed your wife," and there's also a tattoo that says "Don't trust your weakness." So Lenny starts to look at the tattoos and he starts looking at the names that is to be drawn on his tattoos, where it says John or James could be the killer, with the last name starting with the G. He starts to look at John G's license plate that he has as a tattoo on his arm, and it matches the license plate that's on Teddy's information. So now we cut to the flashback. Lenny is now speaking to Teddy, and Lenny is to say, it's like, well, like, supposedly you say that we've talked before, but I've never talked to you, I don't remember it. So uh, we have Lenny that talks about his condition. He says it about in detail how he doesn't have amnesia. Da 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 da. So Lenny goes on and asks the person on the phone what exactly they have been talking about, and they've evidently been talking about Sammy Jenkins. So we'd have Lenny that starts to go on and starts to tell this story about Sammy, about how when looking at Sammy's problems, if anything, it is to not be as as uh, the same as Lenny's here because he's more disciplined, he's more organized. But if anything, uh, we then cut back to modern time. So Lenny goes on to look at all of his photos and finds a picture of Natalie. Here's where Lenny goes into the diner, speaks to Natalie, and gets the driver's license information. And so Natalie goes on to talk to Leonard and call him Lenny. And Leonard's like, yeah, my wife used to call me Lenny, and I hated that. So Lenny looks at Natalie and notices that she had bruises, and he's like, take your glasses off. And Natalie, it seems, is to have bruises. And so Leonard or Lenny likes to talk to people face to face. He doesn't like to have phone call conversations. Um, and so that's why we have the two of that's why we have everybody kind of meet Lenny, and he has to actually physically talk to them. Anyways, so Natalie goes on, and as she's starting to talk to Lenny, it's all about how Lenny doesn't know who really Natalie is. That if anything, she knows that he just has notes about her. And so she goes on and say, it's like, oh, so like you don't really know me, but I'm sure you wrote down something about me somewhere, and you're just reciting that because that's all you really know, right? And Lenny's just like, well, yeah, you have information for me, yeah, you know how this works. I've explained this to you. So Natalie goes on and says that, like, man, I'm sure for you and your situation, you can very much get things very much confused, like a grocery list and the laundry list. It's like, yeah, like, I'm sure if anything, he probably would get a number of things easily confused. Like, look at this whole investigation. Like it's lucky that he's able to go on and keep following up on this for how, in all honesty, his tattoos are just all over the place. And yeah, you would think that like he would have put this like pen to paper instead of all over his body, but then again, how could he find this paper thing so easy? So yeah, so it has to be kind of conveniently on said person. So So Natalie gives him the license plate information and says that Teddy's name is to match up with John G. And so let me pause here a second. So Natalie starts pushing Lenny to talk about the very last thing that he remembers, which is really just his wife. So Lenny starts talking about how beautiful and perfect she was, and Natalie's like, well, yeah, like, you're probably going on and you're just telling me this because that's what you think that I want to hear, but if anything, kind of really tell me the details about your wife. So, so, uh, we would just go on and have Lenny have just these random bits of shots of his wife that are kind of just displayed where she's just at some point at some part of the house, and none of it is in much of a detail about his wife. But if anything, like, I guess that it's a surmise to Natalie who his wife was, but that really isn't to say much. So Lenny goes on and mentions about how all the little details about his wife was to be one thing that eventually made it harder when someone took her away from him. And now he goes on mentioning about how on this license plate there is some, or how on here there's to be some address, and eventually it's to be leading to some abandoned place where it doesn't make sense for this to be an address. And it's isolated. So Natalie goes on and gives Lenny his room key back because she mentioned how he left it when the two of them were together, and so she hands his key back to him so that way he could go to this hotel. So Lenny looks at the picture of the discount inn and is like, oh, I guess that's where this key comes from. Natalie also asks if at the hotel they're treating him well, and Lenny's like, well, I'm not gonna remember anyways. So Natalie says the one thing that the two of them have in common is that they're both survivors. If anything, yeah, her husband died and his wife both died. So yeah, I guess the two of them have like this in common. And at some point in the back of Natalie's picture, that is to be the thing that he can keep looking at, realizing that Natalie will go on and help him out of pity because she'll have gone on and lost somebody too. So now we cut to Lenny going to the bathroom, looking at his hand, and then we cut back to the the flashback, the black and white. So we now see that Lenny is going on and talking about the Sammy case. So Sammy is to talk about how in his insurance investigations that sometimes people are to be phony, and that Lenny can somehow see through the BS. And so Lenny is to go on and and talk about how he can look at people's body language, and he can see things for context, and explain to this detective about how really good he is, about how he can go on and figure out when people are going to just try uh, to take advantage of the insurance. So they set that up very early, and so I think that just kind of sets up that Lenny is a really good detective, or could be really good to figure out this whole case of things. So, but if anything, it sets up the Sammy story early to say that it's like, well, like, but when I get to Sammy, like, if anything, this was a lot more challenging. So now we cut back to modern time. Evident, yeah. Like, if anything, I'm sure this review is to probably be the most confusing review I've probably ever done as far as breakdown is. Plus, also, I'm getting very confused myself talking this all out. So believe me, I do apologize if a review like this is going to be very difficult for anybody. Even me, the one having to say all this stuff, I'm to go on to even be second guessing everything that I'm saying, or getting to a point where I'm not exactly sure of every single second of this film. So I'm trying to figure out a way to like remember this all, because at some point it's very complex. But anyways, so here's where Teddy goes on and meets up with Lenny, and Teddy appears on Lenny's car, and they talk about how, like, hey, where are you, Lenny? Like, I thought you disappeared. No, 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 no. So uh of course Lenny goes on and tells Teddy, it's like, well, I'm sure you know about my condition. And Teddy's like, yeah, every time that I meet. So Lenny goes on and asks Teddy if he's ever talked to him about Sammy Jenkins. And Teddy's like, yeah, and I'm sick of hearing him. It's either that or that John G guy. And you think he's still out there? So so Teddy here is going on and asking Lenny, do you think that it's a possibility that you're never going to find this guy? That it's going to become a cold case? That this guy has probably left town and you're not going to be able to confront him? So uh yesterday Teddy called Lenny and is to possibly think that someone is controlling Lenny to kill the wrong people. And if anything, we come to find by the later half of the film that that really is going on. Like, we'd come to find in this film that Teddy is going to go on and use Lenny, but also so is Natalie going to use Lenny to get rid of people like Dodd, that it seems is going to be a guy Lenny scares and tries to get rid of him. Uh, and they don't really explain so like they explain that Dodd is a drug dealer, and at first Natalie goes on to explain that she'd gotten beat up by Dodds, but actually she had gotten beat up by none other than Lenny himself. And Natalie comes in and pretends that she had gotten beat up by Dodds, so Lenny could go after Dodds. And yeah, like it's a whole kind of scramble of just like, okay, so like, why is Dodd such a bad guy then? Is it just something that Natalie just wants him to go away? And so that's why she sicked Lenny onto him? Like, yeah, anyways. So, but I guess also there is probably a part of the story where Natalie talks about how her husband was holding the bag on some drugs, and then all of a sudden those that has gone missing, and now Dodds has come to Natalie to collect, and so that's why she goes on and seeks out Lenny. Yeah, I think that's a part of the story at some point in this movie. But if anything, uh, so but back to the story here, because a lot of things are going to get very confusing the more and more I just kind of keep rattling them all around. So let's get back to the movie here. So if anything, Teddy talking to Lenny here is really going on and trying to fill his head full of doubt and not really knowing what to trust. Teddy goes on to talk to Lenny about how could he even trust the notes that he has, the things that are tattooed all over his body. Like, how could he go on and trust all of those and really say that any of those things are going to go on and lead him to the right direction? So Lenny goes on and says, like, well, the longer and longer you've gone on to not question somebody, like, there are certain eyewitnesses whose memories are to go on and kind of change compared to, like, oh, it's really dark so I couldn't really see, or maybe they were to go on and see a green car but it was actually really dark blue. And Lenny goes on and says, like, well, yeah, like, a memory is not very reliable even for people who are to go on, and be people that don't suffer from short-term memory loss. Like, so if anything, over time, yeah, a eyewitness cannot always be a thing of which you can absolutely trust their best judgment or can completely rely on everything that they've said. So, but if anything, for Lenny, he feels that the stuff that he has is reliable, and the facts that he has can go on and help him. And so, and plus also, the reason for him wanting to do everything he can to devote his life to finding the guy who had killed his wife is because Lenny not having the ability to live past his wife's death is to be the thing that is to then push Lenny to find his wife's killer, because otherwise he has to have been robbed uh, by this killer his entire life, because he's not going to remember any of it. He's going to wake up one day, he's going to be 90 years old, and then he's going to croak, and and there goes his life. And yeah, he will have lived his life through other people, but for himself, he will never have gone on and lived past that one moment of his wife dying so long ago. So Teddy is saying that Lenny is living revenge, and so Lenny looks at the discount inn picture, and here's where Lenny says that he's like, well, I know I go to this discount inn, but I don't have my key, and he'll get the key later from Natalie. So now here's where we cut to Lenny making his way to Bert. Lenny goes on to mention to Bert about how he misplaced his key, and so the two of them make their way to his room. And Bert at some point realizes that it's not the right number, but also Lenny has been living there. He even has a piece of like a paper or a bag or something that has his writing on it. And so here's where Bert has to admit that he's like, yeah, I've been paying you for 2 different rooms, and you just didn't know any better. So here's where Bert goes on and tells Lenny, yeah, next time, how about you get a receipt? So that if anybody doesn't take advantage of you next time around. So Lenny goes on and leaves and gets into his Jaguar. And here's where he meets up with Natalie, and here's where eventually he gets his keys. So now we cut to the flashback. So Lenny goes on and starts talking about Sammy in this flashback. After he goes on and shaves his legs and whatever. I got a little ahead of myself in some of these parts of this movie, but also I need to figure out what to say. And like, it's better that I go on and just kind of say things at some point here instead of just having dead air and try to figure out what to say next. Because if anything, again, this movie is quite confusing. So Sammy is to go on, make his way to a doctor, and they talk about the damage of his brain and that Sammy can only remember a couple of minutes at a time. So, if anything, Sammy goes on at his home and he just watches television. But even that, it seems that he doesn't go on and really watch much of TV. If anything, Sammy just goes on and watches commercials because, if anything, those are so brief that he can just kind of get the enjoyment out of these commercials. Because if he tries to watch any television, he won't understand what he's been watching. So, if anything, he's just kind of suffering because of how like he won't remember any or retain anything that he has watched. But yeah, but even that, like even if he watches these commercials, he's probably not gonna be getting much out of that either. So Sammy, it seems, is to have a wife that needs to get injections of insulin, which Sammy goes on and actually does the injections to his wife because he remembers how to do so. And so his wife has to go on and has to tell him that it's time for him to give her these injections. And so here is where Lenny is to be watching over Sammy, giving over his wife this injection. So they talk about exactly what memory loss he has and how rare it is, but it is a legitimate thing. It's not something that could be easily faked or what have you, or could be easily have been like it. It's a legitimate thing. It could be definitely put into a case of like it's not just like a gray area of something. Anyways, so one sign as Lenny is to continue to make his way to Sammy is that when Lenny goes to Sammy's house, Sammy goes on to open his door to, of course, Lenny, and the look on Sammy's face looks like he has recognized uh, Lenny for some reason. And so, for that specifically, Sammy is to somehow think, or Lenny is to somehow think that Sammy is actually faking this because Sammy should probably not go on and be able to recognize Lenny whatsoever. And also, Lenny is to say that Sammy, regardless of his short term memory loss, should go on and at some point come up with a way of being able to do certain things. And when Sammy goes on and does this test where he's to supposedly move these certain shapes of these things, Sammy goes on to keep hitting the same triangle and he gets electrified. And that is how Lenny writes off Sammy as more than likely he's faking it. Because at some point, Sammy should go on, regardless of his short term memory loss, should be able to, at some point, avoid the shapes that are going to get him shocked. Regardless of short term, like, there should be just something that kind of keys into his brain that he should avoid these certain shapes. And he doesn't, and he gets shocked every time. So that somehow is to confirm that this guy was to have been faking this. And Lenny ends up saying at some point that, yeah, like, that uh that Lenny was to have the wife get all these doctor bills, and that Lenny was to go on and get promoted because he had gone on to assess that this guy was faking it, even though it may have not have actually been completely true. Uh, but then again, he couldn't figure it out either. But eventually, Sammy's wife will try to definitely figure it out, or otherwise she'll be dead. So that becomes a part of the movie. So here is where Lenny wakes up, and he's not in the hotel. He's in Natalie's place. So now he's to wake up in a completely different area. He doesn't know where he is. All of a sudden, there's a bird there. So, like, you would think that maybe uh, Lenny would have, like, I guess maybe cell phones. This is probably too early for that. But you would probably think that Lenny would have, like, a phone. Yeah, I think this is probably way too early for smartphones and whatever. But, like, you would think probably his phone would probably go on and help him out, or maybe he would go on to have this, like, tape recording of everything, and maybe that would much more help him out than the pictures. But anyways, so Natalie wakes up, and they talk about how well he slept. It's like, I'm sure Lenny won't even remember how well he slept anyways. So Lenny and Natalie try to get out of there. Uh, and so here's where Natalie talks about Lenny's tattoo that's on his thigh. So Lenny wakes up to see a photo of Natalie, and he sees on the back of it, she has lost someone. She will help you out of pity. So Lenny goes on and puts on this white dress shirt, and as he goes on and as he puts that on, Natalie goes on to kiss him and tells him, "Hey, you're wearing my shirt. This is your clothes." So Natalie also asks Lenny if the next time that they'll meet, if he will remember her, and of course Lenny won't. That's the whole, like, he'll never be able to get an actual relationship that's probably going to last a long time. Unless the other person really likes him, then yeah, like, to just kind of put up with his memory loss, to just kind of put up um with every day figuring him out, because or kind of resetting him, just like, okay, here's where we are, right here and there. So anyways, so here's where Lenny gets into his car, and here's where Teddy jumps on top of his car, and they have their whole conversation that leads them into that diner where they talk about who exactly to trust and da 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 da. So now we're back with the black and white, and Lenny is talking about the whole test that Sammy's a part of and him getting electrified, and them going on and explaining all of that he should be able to avoid the electrified objects not by memory but by just pure instinct. So here is where, because again, this movie's in reverse, Lenny is to have made his way to Natalie's house now. And so here's how inevitably they go on and they spend the night together. So Lenny goes to Natalie's house, shows a picture of Dodd. It's like, who the heck is this? And Dodd is to have this taped mouth and there's blood on it. So Natalie goes on and has Lenny come into her house, and then she goes on to explain uh, that Lenny had decided to help Natalie with her investigation that led to this guy named Dodd. So, if anything, also Natalie, I think, was hoping, like Lenny was, that Natalie would figure out who had gone on to kill her husband, and hoping that Lenny would probably figure this out. So now, uh, let me pause here a second. So in the film, we have Lenny that talks about certain things in the room, how this will lead into Sammy and the whole instinct thing, similar to this, where Lenny will go on and say that certain items in the room, like there's certain things that are kind of made out of glass. And so he's like, well, I know that this glass is going to make this sound based on how it looks. Like, that's just pure instinct. And so Lenny starts to go through the room and start to mention about how he knows how things are going to be based on prior experience or prior just knowing how things are to look and da 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 da. So this is what is to lead to Lenny being with Natalie, the two of them kissing, and Natalie starting to take off uh, Lenny's blazer and dress shirt, and then she starts to notice his tattoos. So Natalie goes on to talk about the one that is like right above like his neck, uh talking about how John G is the killer. But then also Natalie notices that there is this big huge like empty spot, and Lenny goes on to mention about how that specific empty spot is reserved for when he catches the killer, that maybe on his body he will go on and have some kind of tattoo, like signifying that he maybe no longer needs to be looking for this killer anymore. That tattoo is to go on and be the that like says that he can basically now be happy. And interestingly enough, later on, when Teddy finally reveals about what all he has done with Lenny and how at some point he had gone on to actually find his wife's real killer and took him out, how Lenny goes on and is to touch that area of the tattoo and is to be like, okay, so like how is it that he remembers that? Yeah, like when did that short term memory thing kind of like, or how is it that like he was to know that that's what he was going to do? I'm just kind of so confused there. Um, Maybe at some point that was one of his random notes that he left somewhere. Um, but anyways, so after that, after Natalie gives a once over of Lenny's body, the two of them are in bed together, and so Lenny talks about how his wife would go on and wander during the middle of the night, and I guess this would happen consistently. And Lenny, I think, at some point would go on and wake up while she was kind of wandering around and want to hope to tell her, hey, it's late, come back to bed. And so now that Lenny can't do that thing, like that he can't go on and find his wife again somewhere in the house, is to just kind of again uh, that every morning when he wakes up the following day, not of any memory, he's going to go on and be trying to find her and think that she's still alive. So, and plus also, like it's haunting Lenny to think like, well, how long have I been alone for? Like, how long have I not been with her? Um, and so on. It's like all this stuff, and also Lenny talking about how he can't heal because every day the wound of her being killed is so fresh. So uh, that's a jumbled mess of things going on, breaking this all down. But that's basically in general this whole entire review is a jumbled mess of trying to figure out how to talk about all this. So as Natalie is in her bed and Lenny gets up to kind of wander around, here's where he goes on and finds a picture of Natalie and her husband. And he takes a picture of Natalie and he starts putting in here about Natalie and gives the entry about, like, well, yeah, she suffered loss. And if anything, she'll help you out of pity. There's also a thing on the top of the picture that is to be scraped out here, and we'll come to find out at some point in the movie what that also is, because there is going to be at some point where Teddy is to talk to uh Lenny, and they eventually bring up Natalie, and Teddy tells Lenny for him not to trust Natalie, and if anything, to put on the back of her photo to not trust her. And Lenny does go on and commit to that, but then he scrapes it out, and then it's like, no, I'm not gonna go on. I'm not gonna do that. So now we are back with Sammy. So Sammy's going on and getting electrically shocked every single time, giving the doctor the middle finger, and so at this point now also there is a flashback to Lenny waking up in the middle of the night thinking that his wife has kind of been wandering around the house and is in the bathroom, and Lenny goes in there and he finds that she's being choked by this shower curtain and being killed, kind of reliving like his haunted past. So Lenny then wakes up and is to be in this hotel room that's to be not his own. And so in the beginning of this, Lenny is to go on and say that he was in this hotel room, and every time he wakes up, he has this Bible next to him that he reads all the time. But this time around, when Lenny goes on and opens up this drawer, there's the Bible, but then there's also a gun in it, kind of telling us that he's in a completely different room that's not really his. So Lenny starts to look around the room and finds in the closet a guy tied up and has tape on his mouth. So Lenny then goes on to call up Teddy and is to start to thumb through all the photos. So Teddy comes in, and so Dodge is in this closet, and so as Teddy comes in, he starts cracking jokes and starts talking about how Lenny's finished playing with himself. And so at some point, uh, Teddy is talking about how he likes uh, being with uh, being with Lenny because he can tell him all the same jokes all over again, and he'll still find them funny. And so Lenny is to be very confused about why even Teddy is there. And so Teddy has to go on and even re explain why he's there. It's like, well, you called me, you needed my help, and we'll come to find in a flashback that this is actually true, that he did call him. Or in another scene that comes before this, I mean. So, not the black and white flashback, we'll see this in one of the other scenes that'll lead up to this whole scene here. So Lenny goes on and takes Teddy to the closet, opens up, reveals this guy. And so Teddy is like, well, is that John G? And Lenny's like, I don't think so. So Teddy's like, well, did you write this down somewhere? So we'd come to find that yes, Lenny did write this down somewhere, but also Lenny goes on and takes Dodd and rips off his tape and asks him what his name is, and asks who beat him up, and Dodd tells Lenny, it's like, well, you beat me up. And so he slaps the tape back on. So here's where Lenny starts to go through the photos again and finds Dodd's picture. Get rid of him. Ask Natalie about this. So Lenny doesn't know who Natalie is, and Teddy doesn't really know who Natalie is either. So what they do is what they decide is they, by gunpoint, take Dodd out and they bring him into this car and then they let him go and he just drives off. So Lenny and Teddy, they get into their car because they get into two separate cars. So if anything, here is where Lenny has to figure out what had happened with Dodd and why he has to now ask Natalie about Dodd. So, if anything, the next scene is again Lenny showing up at Natalie's place. So now we cut back to the black and white, the flashback. So at this point, Sammy's wife is starting to have issue, and because of course Sammy's wife is like, well, I can't pay for all these doctors because the insurance won't cover it, and so if anything, Sammy's wife was to then go on and ask Lenny whether or not he was faking it, and Lenny just keeps telling Sammy's wife that he's like, I think that he should be able to go on and come up uh with a memory, like basically saying that he is faking it. So Sammy's wife gives him a notebook and pen so he can remember things, and at some point uh Sammy's wife is trying to just have uh Sammy be better at this, Sammy to remember better, Sammy to go on and kind of live a much more active life, because kind of has to be forced into going on and having like this guy to not just sit by this TV and just watch television. Like, if anything, he's just not living a life. So, and that kind of makes Sammy's wife just kind of heartbroken at this point. So, now we cut back to Lenny and he's putting together pieces to make a tattoo. So now we cut to Lenny that's in a bathroom somewhere, and he all of a sudden notices that there's this alcoholic bottle that's in front of him, and he doesn't understand why he's in this bathroom. So Lenny all of a sudden just goes into the shower, and then all of a sudden comes out of the shower and thinks that he's being attacked by somebody. But we'll go on to find out that Lenny is to have accidentally gone into Dodd's place and went to the restroom to wait for this guy to come to him so that way he can get the upper hand and fight him. But then eventually, Lenny would have waited for too long, and at some point, Lenny is to completely forget that this guy is coming at him. So yeah, like this fight all breaks out just by mistake, um, because Lenny just starts going to the shower, not thinking of anything, not thinking any better. So plus also, I'm sure he's sweaty from all the running around he was doing because he was being chased by none other than Dodds. So Lenny, after going on and getting out of the shower and fighting Dodds, hits him with the alcoholic bottle eventually, anyways, and then goes on to take a picture of him and starts to write things down. Also, here is where Lenny has the information on Dodds. Um, and so it's like, okay, so he did write things down. And here's where Lenny calls Teddy to ask him for help. So, all right. So here is a scene where Lenny is running around by a bunch of RVs, and all of a sudden he's thinking that he's chasing somebody, and all of a sudden he comes to find out that he's being chased. So we come to find out that Dodds has this gun, and Lenny tries to go on and make his way back to his own car to have his car get shot in the window. Dodds tries to get into his car and has his information about Dodd. And so Lenny then assumes that, okay, this is the guy I'm going after. I know his home address. I'll wait for him there. I'll get into the bathroom. I'll grab this bottle and I'll wait for him. But again, Lenny loses his memory. So Lenny in the flashback is now putting together this kit to make a tattoo, and he breaks this pen, and so he has to make his own homemade tattoo that says Fact 5, that John G has supposedly access to drugs. And eventually, that Lenny surmises that more than likely John G is a drug dealer. And Lenny will go on and will mistake who is to eventually be Jimmy, who is Natalie's husband, for John G. And at some point, Lenny will even kill Jimmy because his name starts with a J, and also that we'll come to find that Lenny will have killed a good number of people that have all fit somehow or another the profile of what uh, Lenny has been kind of looking for. And it'll all be because Teddy at some point will be helping Lenny find these guys and killing them because that's his agenda. That he just wanted these guys off the street, and Lenny is to be happy to help uh, uh, Teddy out when Teddy is to basically point the finger at these guys to say, yeah, this is the John, this is the the John G guy that you're looking for. Go ahead and kill him, and we'll kind of sweep these people's deaths under the rug. That's kind of what's been going on through a good chunk of this movie. That's the big reveal. And at some point, when Ted even mentions it, well, yeah, like even my real name, like, is to be John G. It's like that's how common John G really is. And we will then go on to then have Lenny, who is to just be like, well, then I will just have Teddy be my next John G and kill him because he has gone on to lead me all to these people who aren't my wife's killer because he's already killed his wife's killer. And and so Lenny would think that it's a good thing for him to have killed Teddy. And it's always kind of curious because there's obviously no sequel to this film. If Lenny, after he finally goes on and kills this guy, if he is to go on and then be done. If finally, like, him killing this guy is like, okay, this is over now. By the end of the movie, they just show him going to this tattoo parlor, but you'll never know. Anyways, so Lenny gets into his car and 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 while he's driving, all of a sudden there is this car that pulls alongside of him, and Lenny is obviously oblivious to it. As the car pulls offside, Lenny kind of looks at the guy. All of a sudden, there's this gun that gets whipped out. Lenny is like, what the heck? Because, of course, he's oblivious. He doesn't know what's going on. So, Dodds goes on to uh, of course, talk to Lenny and tells him he wants his car. Uh, and then Lenny scrambles. Here's where the shot of the window comes, and now Lenny is now running away from Dodd, and here's where eventually he'll forget that he's being chased by Dodd, and the whole scene from before. So we now have Lenny that is to go to a place to burn his wife's items. And Lenny is to, in his head, think about how many times that he's probably gone on and done this, where he's found items of his wife and burned them all, like kind of landfills of just stuff that was hers that he's gone on to just burn. But this area is to be leading us to the prior thing that we just see him in some area, and then he gets into his car, and I'm like, okay, where did that scene come from? It comes from right here. So Lenny goes on and takes this teddy bear, takes this comb, and takes this book. And these will be items that we'll see in one of the other scenes, because Lenny will go on and hire a escort-esh like girl, and he'll pay her to sleep next to him in his bed, and then he tells her that, hey, in the middle of the night, just start walking around, and I'll come to you to uh, tell you to go to bed, and that's all I'll pay you for. So at some point, Lenny goes on to find out where the girl is in the bathroom, and he tells her to go on home, and that kind of cuts that scene. So, but the next thing we see here is Lenny, who is looking at his wife in a flashback, still alive, and he's talking about her reading this book and how she's read it so many times over and over and over again. And Lenny says, like, well, isn't it a good thing about a book when you don't know how it's going to go? And his wife is like, well, shut up, I really like this book. And so Lenny just kind of lets her have it, lets her read it. So now we cut back to the gray and black and white flashback. So now we get to a point in the story where Lenny is looking at some documents, and he starts to talk about the investigation and how in the investigation they weren't even looking for John G. And there's some of the documents of this case that are to go on and be kind of uh, didacted, which basically means stuff was crossed out of the case. So if anything, I guess the people working on the case were trying to figure out a way of how quickly that they can just close or cold case it and not follow up on anything. And we could probably go on and figure out why, because eventually Teddy was to be a cop and he was involved in all this. So that's the assumption here, is they just didn't follow any leads. But here's the thing. We come to find out that Teddy mentions later about how this file was missing 12 pieces of paper. And the 12 pieces of paper were missing because the case was actually solved. And it was solved, but if anything, of course, Lenny didn't need to know about that, because otherwise, like, he would just go on and keep finding this John G guy and keep chasing after him. So it seemed like a cold case here, but if anything, the file just isn't complete. So that's a bit of interesting bit of things to just kind of glaze over here in this part of the movie that eventually the paperwork does get explained. So here's a scene where Lenny goes on through the house and is to find the prostitute in the bathroom, and I think she's smoking a joint, and he tells her to leave. So Lenny goes on and makes his way back to his car, I think with the items, to go on and burn them. So that's kind of cutting to that piece. So now back to the flashback. So so at some point Lenny goes on and realizes that John G must be some kind of drug dealer, and then Lenny goes on and scrapes off this tattoo where it says that he is to have access to drugs, and then scribbles the word drug dealer. I think at some point Lenny does go on, look at his arm, and it says that one of the facts says that this guy is a drug dealer. So, and Lenny is assessing that for this case, that they're starting to figure things out and they're starting to get somewhere. So now Lenny is to, for the first time, make his way to the discount inn. He takes a Polaroid of it, and then he goes on, gets a room, has this map where he has all these photos, and is to look through the yellow pages of an escort service and have this key on his fingers, talking about the prostitute, about how he wants a blonde, to meet him in room 304. So he goes on, he meets up with this woman, and he plans what she's to do with all these items, and she starts to touch them, and even with the comb starts to use them, and Lenny's like, no, I don't want you to touch them, don't want to use them, nothing. So Lenny explains to the girl what all that she needs to do, and the girl is just to be like, okay, whatever gets you off. Like, so now back to the flashback. So now we're going in and talking about Sammy, and Sammy's wife is meeting up with Lenny. So here is where Sammy's wife is asking Lenny here if he is to really think that her husband is faking. And Lenny wants to word it to where it doesn't seem like he's exactly saying that, but there is no other way to like, he basically is saying that he's faking. That's his ultimate decision. So to say that he is, so now we cut to Lenny going to his car, and Teddy is waiting for him in his car, and Lenny ends up getting so scared by this guy in his car because he doesn't know who he is, so he just starts attacking him. And And so Teddy now has to prove to Lenny who he is. It's like, well, hey, we talk together all the time. You told me about Sammy. And that's when Lenny kind of pulls back. And Teddy's like, well, yeah, like, did you lose your sense of humor with your memory? So here's where Teddy talks about Natalie and and here's where Teddy says that Natalie shouldn't be trusted. And Teddy forces Lenny to, in the back of the picture, write that down, that she shouldn't be trusted. So Teddy goes on to mention to Lenny about how her former boyfriend was a drug dealer and how Natalie is the person that is to have been working with them, and 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 Natalie going on and having Lenny help her is because she's jammed up now because of Dodd. So yeah, so excuse me. Let me pause here for 1 second. So here's a scene where where Teddy talks about how it doesn't make sense that Lenny is to have had this Jaguar, that he has the clothes that he has, and that Teddy mentions to Lenny about how he doesn't really know who he is. Lenny goes on to say, it's like, well, I know my name, I know where I come from. And Teddy's like, no, like, you don't know who you've become. And if anything, those pictures and those tattoos, they don't tell you that. So at some point, there is this little drink coaster thing, or little, like, what do you go on when you have a thing where you set your drink on it, so that way it doesn't leave a little rim on the, like, the wood table or whatever, or it kind of soaks up the whatever liquid that's on the bottom of the drink for whatever reason. Um, a little bit of a coaster or something like that that you have underneath your drink. I Lenny used to go on and have one of those, and on the writing of it, it says discount in, and it has the address, which Lenny follows up on. So Lenny looks at the picture of Teddy and writes uh, about not to trust Natalie, but then he looks at Teddy's picture and it says don't believe his lies. So that's when uh, Lenny scribbles out about the whole back of Natalie's picture about don't trust her, and then he follows up on the discount inn, and he takes pictures of the discount inn. So now back on the flashback, as Lenny is now on the phone. Here's where he finally removes the tattoo that says never answer the phone, and then he asks who is it that has been calling him, and then the dial clicks. So So now we're at a scene where all of a sudden Lenny is continually saying the words, write it down, write it down, write down what happened, da 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 da. And all of a sudden, Natalie comes into her house because Lenny is now in Natalie's house. All of a sudden, Natalie is to mention about how Dodd had beaten her up. And we'll eventually come to find in this movie that that's not true. And so Natalie will go on and say that Dodd had beaten her up. And then Lenny will say why. And Natalie will say because of Lenny. And the last part is finally true. Because we'll get to a point in the movie where Natalie meets up with Lenny, and Natalie is just to say that I could say anything right now because if anything, you're not going to remember it anyways. And so, like, I can say that your wife is a whore, or I can say this about you and that about you, and you're not going to remember it anyways. So, Natalie says, like, well, hey, I probably can't get you scared, but if anything, I probably get you angry. So, Natalie says every horrible thing that she can about Lenny's wife, and finally Lenny goes on and swings at her, and Natalie goes on, gets into her car, and then waits it out until Lenny is to completely forget about everything. And before that happens, Lenny is going on and scrambling to find some pen and paper to figure out a way that he can write down what Natalie has done to him. And by the time that he can do anything, Natalie comes back in, and Lenny has completely forgotten everything about what just happened. So, yeah, that's a prior scene that or that's a that's a prior scene that happens later. Is that confusing enough? Yeah. Uh, that's a thing that'll be shown at some point later on. So, but if anything, we cut uh, to Lenny going on and finding an ice pack for Natalie, telling her she's going to be safe, sit down. So, Natalie had mentioned that she went to Dodd and talked about Jimmy's money and how supposedly uh, Natalie was saying about how uh, Teddy may have gone on and taken all of Jimmy's money, and so Natalie was trying to put everything on Teddy. So I guess to go on and hope that Dodd would go after Teddy, and Teddy's a cop, and then Teddy would just arrest Dodd, I guess is what Natalie's plan was. But if anything, Dodd didn't really believe Natalie, so Natalie is back at square one. So, uh, so so here's where Lenny finds out the information of Dodd, writes it all down, and goes after him. Uh, and here's where again he goes into his car. He sees that Teddy is there, and they have their scene together. Where of course Lenny doesn't remember anything, and he's forced to write down about the whole distrust of Natalie. So Lenny looks back on his arm that says "Don't answer the phone," and the phone is ringing. So Lenny at some point calls Bert and tells him, "Hey, don't forward any of my calls. If anything, just hold all of them, uh, because I like to just kind of talk to everybody in person." So here's now the scene where Natalie talks about Dodd and they talk about Teddy, and here is where Natalie starts to talk about uh, how of course uh, that Lenny will not have the memory that he'll have, so she can kind of get away with anything here. So so that scene I've talked about that already. So um let me pause for a second. God dang it. Oh yeah, here's something good. So Natalie, when arguing with Lenny, is to say that since Lenny doesn't have a good memory, Natalie can say anything. She can say how they're best friends, how they're even lovers, anything to go on and force Lenny to do whatever she wants, because if anything, Lenny would take her word over his lack of memory. So, and here's where it gets to the point where he does hit her, and Natalie leaves and says to Lenny, "I'll see you soon." So Natalie leaves, and here's where Lenny starts to scramble to figure out where he has a pen and paper and he can write something down, and then he forgets it all. So now we cut back to the black and white, and Lenny is looking for something that he can put against this wall because he's trying to hear within another room. He comes to find at this door Bert and mentions about how there's a cop here to meet with him. And or no, there's a cop that has called for him, and so here's where Lenny says like, "Well, hey, I need to meet with him like face to face because I know I like to go on, or Bert, you know how I like to go on and meet people eye to eye." So Lenny goes on with Natalie, I think, to her place, and Natalie starts talking to Lenny about uh, that Natalie knows about Lenny trying to find the guy who had killed his wife, and da, 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 da. So it seems that he was able to get the file from Natalie about the case, and they start talking about like, well, hey, why haven't the police found this guy, and so on and so. So here's where Lenny starts to talk about his wife being killed, and Lenny says that maybe there's a possibility where the killer doesn't really even exist, or they can't figure out how he exists. So Lenny goes on to relive the killing of his wife as Lenny makes his way into the bathroom, and is to overhear some muffling cries. Lenny gets out his gun, starts to make his way through the house, and here's where he finds his wife getting smothered by the shower curtain. Uh, Lenny goes on and pops and kills one of the goons for another goon with a hat to throw Lenny against this mirror, crashing and breaking the mirror, and Lenny falls over, and blood is coming from his face. Lenny talks about how someone had hit him from behind, and that's how he had lost his memory, and that's all that he can remember after that. Lenny goes on to mention about how they only found his gun and no one else's. And uh, so Natalie, here is where Natalie goes on and mentions how she'll figure out a way to help uh, Lenny with this case. So here's where we go on and we have Natalie, who eventually just keeps going on and keeps trying to help out Lenny, but then eventually she'll go on and she'll have him go to this bar. She'll spit in his drink as well as have other people spit in the drink, and then she'll serve it to him without him knowing. That happens later. So here is where Lenny takes a picture of Natalie and puts her name on this picture. So now Lenny is looking at his hand where it says remember Sammy's name. So now we have a flashback. There's a flashback that has an envelope that says take my call. In the envelope there's a picture of Lenny who is pointing at his chest, and Lenny probably has no clue what that's about, which I've already talked about that at some point within this review. So Lenny is now at the bar and he's getting a drink from Natalie, and again, this is a drink that had spit in it, and Lenny doesn't know any better. We'll see that in another scene. So as of course Lenny will drink in it, there's a guy that's laughing in the background. We don't know why, but then we'll find out why within the later scenes. So Natalie asks the last thing that Lenny can remember, and the last thing that Lenny can remember is his wife dying. And so Natalie finally does go on and take away the drink of which that he was drinking in, and he's like, oh, okay, I'll give you another one. This one's dusty. So at least finally Natalie's being nice to this guy, and then maybe she goes on to later to regret what she had gone on to do with his drink. So here is where we're now at the bar, and it's all the spitting things, and now we cut to how that whole reason for that new drink came to be. So now we get a flashback. So Lenny goes on to answer the phone, and and goes back into talking about Sammy. So after Lenny has gone on to tell Sammy's wife that he's basically faking it, Sammy's wife goes on back to Sammy and is to now. This is the scene where Sammy's wife is testing Sammy's love for her. So, Sammy's wife goes on to take her insulin out, and Sammy's wife tells Sammy, "Hey, it's my time for my insulin shot." Sammy comes over, puts the shot in, and he goes back to the couch. Sammy's wife goes on and make an adjustment on her watch and then tells her husband again that it's time for her insulin shot. This goes on and happens over and over and over again until Sammy's wife is, I guess, bizarrely either in horror or satisfied. And it gets to the point to where Sammy's wife, I know that she actually has a name in the credits, but I just don't care to really look into it. And like, let me take the time to see this name. It's Mrs. Jenkins. All right, so I said it. So I know that it's probably seemed very lazy. I didn't say what her name is. I probably could have. I could have looked at. There's so few people in this credit. I could have easily memorized this, but I don't really care. So what happens is Sammy finds that his wife goes into a coma from how much insulin she was given and dies. And so Sammy is then left to be in the care of this medical hospital. And so Lenny is to go on and say in his narration that yeah, Sammy will never know that his wife is dead, but yeah, his wife is dead. And that he basically killed her. And so yeah, so Mrs. Jenkins, by the end of all this, she wanted to understand Sammy, and that's what led to her basically downfall. Like, basically, to really figure out whether or not that this guy was some kind of con man, um, and so she had to figure out for herself, and it cost her life. So, so Lenny is to go on and say that maybe when Sammy would looked at him and recognized him, that maybe there was a point where Sammy was actually just faking it. That if anything, that Lenny says, um, that if you think you're supposed to recognize somebody, you just pretend to. You bluff it to get a pat on the head from a doctor. You bluff it to seem less of a freak. And so here's where Lenny goes on and he gets the other side of the phone where Teddy goes on and starts talking about a drug dealer, and Lenny's like, "What drug dealer?" So Lenny goes on to track down this car, fact 6, car license, and there's the numbers and letters and whatever. So Lenny goes on to track down this license and gets a tattoo of it, and Teddy goes on to meet Lenny getting this tattoo. So Teddy is trying to be cautious towards Lenny and saying that he needs a different identity, needs to change clothes, because if anything, somebody's coming for him. Because supposedly a cop is looking for him. And so Teddy can now play up that there has been a cop calling him and it hasn't been him, and that Teddy is somebody else. To again try and strike fear into Lenny here. So Lenny goes on and just takes all these clothes and all these things, and it seems that he's going into this room and changing, but he really doesn't. He just sneaks out of this window, and he does that because he looks at the back of Teddy's picture and it says don't believe his lies. And so immediately Lenny is to think that again Teddy is lying. So here is when Lenny sees the coaster, and on the back of it, it says, "Come by after, Natalie," to the bar location, leading up to that point. So, Lenny also is to see this picture that is to be mostly burnt, and he has no idea what it is. But we'll come to find out that Lenny will have burnt the picture of himself with the pose of the finger. So that and some other picture of evidence of him killing that guy will be the thing that he burns up. So that way he'll go on and he'll kill John G. Instead of what eventually will be Jimmy. So Lenny is now in his Jaguar, and he drives up to Natalie's bar, and Natalie goes to the Jaguar thinking that this is Jimmy, and when he rolls the window down, he sees someone else instead. So Natalie kind of runs off from the car because she either got confused or was to probably think that someone else was kind of pretending to be her lover. And either way, that got her to kind of go into the bar. And yeah, so now we cut back to the flashbacks, the black and white. So Lenny is to get a call from Teddy, and so the two of them meet. So Lenny meets up with Officer Gamble, and they're gonna go somewhere. And so here is where Lenny meets up with Teddy for the very first time and takes a picture of him. And Teddy tells Lenny to, on the picture, call him Teddy. And Lenny's like, well, why? Like, your name is John Gamble. And Teddy's like, well, I'm undercover. So just write the word Teddy, because that's my undercover name. Bullshit. So Lenny does go on and say and write the word Teddy on there because that's what this cop says to do. I would have thought that would have been a little bit weird, and I would have really have gone on and been concerned about this guy who's lying about who he is. So so Teddy goes on and mentions about how he likes the picture, about how it makes him look thin. And so the two of them go off to this place with this truck. So, if you remember, in the early part of the movie, Lenny goes on to find this truck that has these bullets in it, and Lenny doesn't know what the heck this is. This is what this scene is. This is what it's all leading up to. So, Lenny goes on to this area, and this guy in the Jaguar pulls up, and it's none other than Jimmy. So Jimmy goes into this area, starts looking around, and he meets up with Lenny. Jimmy is very confused, and at some point, the two of them start fighting because Lenny thinks that Jimmy is to be his wife's killer. So as they start to brawl, Lenny tells Jimmy to strip off his clothes, and Jimmy's confused about why. Lenny says to strip so that way he doesn't get blood on Jimmy's clothes because he's going to get blood on Lenny's going to get blood on his clothes. So he wants this guy to strip so he can just take his clothes. Which is strange. So we just have to figure out how we can get these clothes on Lenny. Plus also Lenny has been wearing the same clothes for I don't know how long at this point now. Like, it just seems like he only has this one pair of clothing, and he's been wearing it throughout the entire film. But also, like, I guess with his memory, like, how would he know that this is to be dirty clothes or not? Like, at one point, yeah, he doesn't even know he needs to shave his thigh or not. So, yeah, so, I thought it was also weird that in the beginning of the movie, it said on his thigh to shave. So I was thinking, I'm like, oh, so he needs to tell himself to shave. He can't look himself in the mirror and realize he needs to shave. But no, he needed to shave his thigh to get a new tattoo. Anyways, so here's the brutal, bloody murder of Jimmy here. So Lenny goes on and chokes Jimmy out. So how is that there being any blood? That makes no sense to me. So Lenny goes on and takes a picture of Jimmy and then kind of just shakes it off. So Teddy goes on and drags off Jimmy's body, and so here is where by the end here, Teddy comes in and 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 Lenny doesn't know much about what he had did with the whole dead body thing. So Teddy is to go on and explain how he was to have been the guy that helped Lenny find his wife's killer, or in this case, Teddy was to be the guy that guided him to this guy he was to kill, and Teddy's been doing that all along. And if anything, when Teddy finally goes on to explain this now to finally Lenny, because Teddy feels that he can just tell him this anyways, because logically Lenny's not gonna remember it anyways. So Teddy goes on to explain Lenny everything. And so after that whole explanation, uh, we then have Lenny that walks off and is to then just say it's like, well, hey, I'm just gonna go on, I'm just gonna make John G the guy that I hunt down, and this John G is to be Teddy. So so Lenny goes on, writes down the license plate, and writes down this guy's name. And oh, also, here's the scene within here when Teddy's going on and explaining everything. Teddy goes on to manipulate Lenny into thinking that the Sammy story was actually just him all along. That that Sammy was to be the one with, or Sammy was Lenny, and that Lenny was reciting the whole Sammy story, but it was to be really his own. That Lenny was to have a wife that would get insulin injections. So we'd cut to Lenny giving insulin injections to his wife, but then Lenny's like, no, 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 no. Like, I didn't give insulin injections to my wife. If anything, like, I just pinched her leg, and, like, that was, uh, yeah, I never went on. I never give her shots. So, yeah, so if that would have been the ending, like, if we were really leaned into that, if Lenny would have been Sammy by the end of all the whole story, there could have never been any drug dealers or whatever breaking in. That Lenny could have killed his own wife. Uh, and yeah, that does kind of make sense, because if you think about it, like, yeah, there was supposedly one invader that went into the house, but also, like, they cold cased supposedly the killers, or the drug dealers or whatever. Um, and supposedly Danny did go on and say that, yeah, I did find who killed your wife later on, and you finally did kill him, and that's what sort of their partnership of killing other people. But Danny uh, did try to confuse Lenny here by saying that he killed his own wife, uh, because at this point Danny could just kind of say anything. So now that I've kind of gotten all this out of the way, we're now towards pretty much the end of all this. So, uh, So Danny gets into this truck, empties out his gun, and here's where he draws in the back of the picture uh, of Teddy that he's the guy you've been looking for, kill him, and then he burns the evidence of him killing Jimmy, as well as also uh, him pointing at the part of his chest. And so the last thing that we see here is Lenny taking the gun and throwing it in a bag of money and then leaving and looking back on his wife in the bed, and he goes to this tattoo parlor shop and he looks at the John G and he looks at the license point or the license plate number and he's like, okay, I gotta get this tattoo. And that'll lead him to meet up uh with Danny, and then we'll get the whole kind of thing over again and get that all kind of wrapped up in a nice neat little bow. So wow, that was hard. Yeah, this is I knew this one was gonna take a really long time. I didn't think it was gonna take almost 3 freaking hours. But at least that one is done. At least that one is reviewed. And wow, it is very late in the day. Um so at least this will be uploaded. At least this will be a thing. I honestly don't like how I probably opened this whole review. Um because like it didn't seem like there was anything really there for this one. Like this one was really hard to figure out some jokes or figure out ways to make this review kind of pop in the very beginning, so I kind of failed on that. Uh, if anything, this one was kind of hard to break down because of how just like confusing this movie kind of is. Uh, yeah, if anything, also it's also like a detective film, which I'm not really good at memorizing all those because it's just a lot of details. It's a lot of uh, you have to kind of be perfectly knowing what all is to be broken down here, or otherwise you're gonna get really lost very easily. Well, for me, if anything, for a lot of people who are to be very familiar with like the detective genre, um, they're really good at it. But for me, it's probably my weakest point. So that's probably why this movie was such a struggle to review because I'm just not good with detective films. Because if I get any little minute of detail, uh, just not quite there, then yeah, it just like that's what took me so long to review and talk about this one. But I'm gonna get this done so that way I can get this uploaded. Plus, also the longer and longer I go about this, the more tired I'm gonna get because it's very late in the day for me. And normally I probably would have, or probably should have gone on and probably went to bed like an hour ago. But uh, because yeah, like yesterday, I'd gone to basically like do like a whole entire day of just staying way up too late. Um, way over like hours over when I should have went to sleep because if anything, we had groceries coming yesterday, so I just kind of had to, because I'm to be the guy that has to kind of just deal with that stuff. So, yeah, so that had to kind of get delivered and done, so I just had to stay up all day to just kind of get to that. So, uh, not to say like my parents probably couldn't have just dealt with it, but like I was just like, I'll just stay up all day and I'll just deal with it. So we can just put all the shit away and not have to deal with it later because it either would have been I would have slept through it and would have had to have dealt with it later, or stay up the whole time and just get rid of it, and then after that, just sleep afterwards, um, and not have to deal with it later on. So that to me was a good enough choice. So with that said, I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna get out of here before I can put my foot more in my mouth, or also before this video gets hours and people won't care about it either way. So with that said, um, it's great that people are going on and finding these videos, but also, uh, like, besides maybe one video, like, I hope that these things just kind of keep going well. Uh, yeah, I definitely don't think I'm gonna be able to go on and do reviews after this. Like, I planned on hopefully getting, like, squeaking in like one or two other reviews, but considering how long this took, I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's gonna happen. Um, Plus, we're unsure about how really awake I am. I don't want to test the waters and try to do all those other things and then just not be able to really think them through. I was even having problems doing this review, so that's great. So that said, bye, buddy. Bye, buddy. Tried my best with this one. Bye.